At my sister's wedding, the bank manager called me and said, "Your loan payment is overdue." I laughed and replied, "What loan?" He answered, "The one your dad took out in your name to pay for this very wedding." I stood there frozen for a moment, then smiled and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well then, I guess this wedding is officially canceled, because I'm calling the police right now." My phone was still on speaker as the room exploded in chaos. I, 29M, was standing near the bar when my phone rang. The venue was this expensive place with crystal chandeliers and white roses everywhere, the kind of setup that screamed money we didn't have. My sister looked beautiful in her dress, smiling like she'd won the lottery. Our parents were mingling with guests, acting like they owned the world. I answered without checking the caller ID. The voice on the other end introduced himself as someone from the bank. He said my loan payment was overdue and they'd been trying to reach me for weeks. I laughed because I thought it was a scam. I told him I didn't have any loans. There was a pause. Then he asked if I was sure, because according to their records, I'd taken out a substantial amount 6 months ago. The confusion must have been obvious in my voice when I asked him to repeat that. He explained that a loan of $75,000 had been approved in my name, co-signed by my father, and the payments had stopped after the first month. My stomach dropped. I asked him what the loan was for, and he said it was listed as a personal expense, but the money had been withdrawn in full shortly after approval. I felt my hands go cold. I asked when this happened, and he gave me the exact date. 6 months ago, right around when my sister got engaged. I looked across the room at my father, who was laughing with some relatives, his arm around my mother. The pieces started falling into place. The sudden expensive engagement party. The designer dress. This venue that cost more than most people's cars. My sister's fiancé came from money, and my parents had been desperate to match that energy, to prove we belonged in the same circles. I asked the bank manager to hold on. My mind was racing, but I needed to be sure. I asked him if he could confirm my father's involvement, and he said yes. My father had co-signed and provided all the documentation. He mentioned that technically, since it was in my name, I was the primary borrower. The debt was mine. $75,000 of debt that I knew nothing about. Something shifted in me then. I wasn't angry yet. I was cold, calculating. I asked the manager to stay on the line and put my phone on speaker. Then I walked to the center of the room, right near where my sister was taking photos with her bridesmaids. The music was loud, people were drinking, and nobody noticed me at first. I raised my voice and said I had an important announcement. The DJ cut the music. Everyone turned to look at me. My sister's smile faltered. My mother looked confused. My father's face went pale, and that told me everything I needed to know. I said that I just received a very interesting phone call from the bank. I held up my phone, making sure everyone could see it was still active. I said the bank manager was calling about a loan that was overdue. A loan I never took out. A loan that my father had taken in my name, forging my signature, to pay for this very wedding. The room went dead silent. Then it exploded. My sister started screaming, asking what I was talking about. My mother rushed toward me, telling me to stop making a scene. My father just stood there, frozen, his face turning red. The bank manager's voice came through the speaker, confirming the details again, asking if I wanted to proceed with filing a fraud report. I said yes, loud and clear. I told him I wanted to file a police report for identity theft and fraud. I gave him my location and asked if he could send the documentation to the authorities. He said he would, and that someone would be contacting me shortly. My sister's fiancé stepped forward, demanding to know what was happening. I explained it simply. My father had stolen my identity, taken out a massive loan in my name, and used that money to fund this wedding. Every flower arrangement, every piece of catering, every minute of this venue's rental time had been paid for with money that I was now legally responsible for paying back. Money I never agreed to borrow. My sister burst into tears. She said she didn't know. She swore she thought our parents had saved up for this. My mother was yelling at me, calling me selfish, saying I was ruining the happiest day of my sister's life. I looked at her and said that my father had already ruined my life by saddling me with debt I couldn't afford. $75,000. That was years of my income. That was my future, stolen. My father finally spoke. He said he did it for the family. He said we needed to make a good impression, that my sister deserved a beautiful wedding, that I would understand someday. He said he'd planned to pay it back himself, but things had been tight, and he'd missed a few payments, but he was going to fix it. I asked him how. How was he going to fix $75,000 in debt when he'd clearly already proven he couldn't make the payments? He stammered something about a business opportunity, about getting a promotion, about borrowing from someone else. All excuses, all lies. The guests were starting to murmur. Some were filming on their phones. My sister's future in-laws looked horrified. The groom's father asked if this was some kind of joke. I said I wished it was. My sister collapsed into a chair, her dress pooling around her like a white ocean. She kept saying this couldn't be happening. Her bridesmaids tried to comfort her, but nobody knew what to say. The photographer had stopped taking pictures. The caterers were standing in the doorway, watching the disaster unfold. 2 uniformed officers arrived within 20 minutes. I'd stayed on the line with the bank manager, and he'd apparently escalated this quickly. The officers asked to speak with me and my father privately. We went into a side room, along with my mother who refused to be left out. I showed them my phone records, my bank statements, everything proving I had no knowledge of this loan. The officer asked my father directly if he'd taken out the loan in my name. My father tried to explain, tried to justify it, but the officer cut him off. He asked yes or no. My father said yes. They informed him that identity theft was a serious crime, even between family members. They said I had the right to press charges. My mother started begging. She grabbed my arm and said I couldn't do this to them, to our family. She said people make mistakes. She said my father loved me and only wanted the best for my sister. I pulled my arm away. I said that if he loved me, he wouldn't have destroyed my credit and buried me in debt without even asking. I said that wanting the best for my sister didn't give him the right to ruin my life. I told the officers I wanted to press charges. My father was arrested. Right there, at my sister's wedding, in front of everyone. They put him in handcuffs and let him out through the main hall. The guests parted like a wave. My sister was hysterical. My mother followed the officers out, screaming at them, screaming at me. I stood there in the empty side room for a minute, just breathing. Then I walked back out to the main hall. The DJ was packing up. The caterers were asking if anyone was going to pay them. My sister's fiancé was on the phone, probably calling his parents. My sister sat in that chair, mascara running down her face, her perfect day shattered. She looked up at me and asked how I could do this, how I could ruin everything. I crouched down next to her and said I didn't ruin anything. Our father did. He made the choice to commit fraud. He made the choice to use my identity without permission. He made the choice to build her dream on my nightmare. She said she'd pay me back. She said they'd figure it out. I shook my head. I told her it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle. It was about the fact that our parents thought they could sacrifice me for her benefit and I'd just accept it. That I'd silently carry this burden while she lived her perfect life. Her fiancé came over and helped her up. He said they'd be leaving. He said his family would handle the vendor payments for today. He didn't look at me. They walked out together, her dress dragging on the floor, collecting dust and dirt. The venue cleared out within an hour. I stayed until the end, watching the staff dismantle everything. The flowers, the decorations, the dreams. All of it coming down. Update 1. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My mother called me 17 times that first night. I didn't answer. She left voicemails calling me every name imaginable, saying I'd destroyed our family, that I was dead to her, that she'd never forgive me. My sister sent a long text saying she hoped I was happy now that I'd ruined her life. She said everyone knew what I'd done and that I was a monster. I blocked them both. I couldn't handle the emotional manipulation while dealing with the legal mess. The bank was surprisingly understanding once I provided the police report. They started their own internal investigation into the fraud. I spent hours on the phone with different departments, filing paperwork, proving my identity had been stolen. My father was released on bail the next day. My mother must have scraped together money somehow. He was formally charged with identity theft and fraud. The prosecutor told me that because it was a family member and because of the amount involved, this was a serious case. My father could face significant jail time if convicted. My extended family started weighing in. Aunts and uncles called, texted, messaged me on social media. Most of them sided with my parents. They said family was supposed to stick together. They said I was being vindictive. They said everyone makes mistakes and I should forgive and forget. A few cousins reached out privately to say they supported me, but couldn't say so publicly. I found out through one of those cousins that my sister's wedding had been postponed indefinitely. Her fiancé's family had paid the vendors for that day to avoid legal issues. but they'd made it clear they wanted nothing to do with our family drama. My sister was apparently devastated, barely leaving her room. Part of me felt guilty. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted. But then I'd look at my credit report, at the massive debt now tied to my name, even with the investigation ongoing, and I'd remember why I'd done it. This wasn't about revenge. This was about survival. If I hadn't acted, I'd be stuck with that debt forever, working years to pay off someone else's choices. 3 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, my father's lawyer contacted me. He wanted to arrange a meeting to discuss settling this outside of court. He said my father was willing to admit fault, willing to work on paying back the loan, willing to do whatever it took to make this right. In exchange, I dropped the charges. I met with my own lawyer first. She advised me that if I dropped the charges, I'd have little leverage to ensure the debt was actually resolved. She said families often made promises they didn't keep, and without the criminal case, I'd be back to square one. She asked what I really wanted. I thought about it for days. What did I want? I wanted my father to face consequences for what he'd done. I wanted my family to understand that I wasn't a doormat, that I had value beyond being the person they could sacrifice for my sister's happiness. I wanted them to hurt the way they'd hurt me. But I also wanted this to be over. I wanted to move on with my life. I wanted to sleep without nightmares about debt collectors and ruined credit. I wanted peace. I told my lawyer to set up a meeting with my father's lawyer. We'd hear what they had to offer. Update 2. The meeting happened in a conference room downtown. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years. His hair was grayer, his face thinner, his eyes hollow. My mother sat next to him, her expression hard and unforgiving. My sister wasn't there. I'd heard she still wasn't speaking to anyone. My father's lawyer laid out the proposal. My father would plead guilty to a reduced charge. He'd be sentenced to probation instead of jail time. He'd sign over his half of their house to me as collateral. The house would be sold, and the proceeds would go toward paying off the loan. Any remaining balance would be covered by a payment plan that he'd be legally bound to fulfill. If he defaulted, I'd own the house outright, and he'd face the full criminal penalties. My mother's face twisted when the lawyer mentioned the house. She said she couldn't believe I'd take their home. I looked at her and said I couldn't believe she'd stood by while my father stole my identity. She looked away. I asked about my credit. The lawyer said that once the fraud investigation was complete and the loan was transferred back to my father's name, my credit report would be corrected. It would take time, but I wouldn't be held responsible for the debt anymore. I asked what happened if they couldn't sell the house for enough to cover the full amount. The lawyer said my father would still be responsible for the difference, and the payment plan would continue until the debt was cleared. I looked at my father. He was staring at the table. I asked him why he did it. Why he didn't just ask me. Why he thought he had the right to make this choice for me. He said he was ashamed. He said he couldn't admit that he didn't have the money for my sister's wedding. He said he knew she'd compare her wedding to her fiancé's sister's wedding, which had been elaborate and expensive, and he couldn't stand the thought of my sister feeling inferior. He said he thought he could pay it back quickly, that I'd never need to know. I asked if he even considered what this would do to me. He finally looked up and said he didn't think I'd find out. That answer told me everything. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry he got caught. My lawyer asked if I wanted time to consider the offer. I said no. I wanted this done. I agreed to the terms on one condition. My sister and mother had to sign statements acknowledging what happened. I wanted it documented that they knew about the fraud, that they benefited from it, and that they understood the consequences. I wanted proof that this wasn't just on my father. My mother exploded. She said I was trying to destroy the entire family. I said no. I was trying to protect myself. Because without those statements, they'd spend the rest of their lives rewriting history, telling everyone I was the villain, painting themselves as victims. My father's lawyer said he'd discuss it with his clients. The meeting ended. I walked out feeling hollow. 2 days later, I got the signed statements. My mother's was brief and bitter. My sister's was longer, angrier, but she'd signed it. My father's was almost apologetic, but the words felt empty. The plea deal was finalized a week later. My father pled guilty to a reduced charge of financial fraud. He was sentenced to 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and the financial restitution we'd agreed upon. The house went up for sale immediately. My extended family's reaction was predictable. I was officially the black sheep, the one who sent his father to court, the one who took his parents' house, the one who ruined his sister's wedding. Family gatherings happened without me. Holidays came and went with no invitations. I told myself I didn't care. Most days, I believed it. Update 3. 6 months later, the house sold. It was worth less than they'd hoped, but enough to cover about 60% of the loan. My father's payment plan kicked in for the rest. The bank confirmed that the loan had been transferred entirely to his name, and my credit report was being corrected. It would take a few more months for everything to fully clear, but I was finally free of the debt. My sister's wedding eventually happened, about 8 months after the original date. It was smaller, simpler, held in a community center instead of a luxury venue. I wasn't invited. I heard about it through social media, seeing photos posted by cousins and family friends. She looked happy. Her husband looked happy. My parents were in the photos, smiling, pretending everything was fine. I felt nothing looking at those pictures. No anger, no sadness, no regret, just emptiness. I started therapy around that time. My therapist helped me work through the guilt, the anger, the feeling that I'd somehow failed my family. She helped me understand that I hadn't failed anyone. They'd failed me, and that protecting myself didn't make me selfish or cruel. It made me human. I reconnected with a few old friends who drifted away during the family drama. I focused on my job, got a promotion, started saving money for the first time without worrying about crushing debt. I moved to a different apartment, something that felt like mine instead of just a place I was surviving in. One day, about a year after the wedding incident, my sister called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. She said she was sorry, not for what happened, but for how she'd reacted. She said she'd been so caught up in her own disappointment that she hadn't stopped to think about what I'd been going through. She said she understood now why I'd done what I did, even if she wished there had been another way. I asked if our parents felt the same. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said no. Our mother still blamed me entirely. Our father had mostly gone silent, just working and fulfilling his probation requirements. Neither of them talked about me anymore. I told her I appreciated the call, but I wasn't ready to reconcile. Maybe someday, but not now. She said she understood. She asked if we could at least stay in touch, even if it was just occasional messages. I said maybe. We hung up. I didn't feel the closure I'd expected, but I felt something shift. Like maybe, eventually, there could be something resembling peace. My father completed his probation a few months ago. The loan is almost paid off. Another year, maybe less, and it'll be done completely. I'll never get back the time I lost to stress and anxiety. I'll never get back the family I thought I had. But I got my life back. My future back. People ask me sometimes if I regret what I did. If I wish I'd handled it differently. I think about the alternative. Carrying that debt. Watching my credit crumble. Working myself into the ground while my family pretended nothing was wrong. Sacrificing my life so my sister could have her perfect day. No, I don't regret it. I'd do it again. Because the moment I answered that phone call and heard about that loan, I had a choice. I could be the person who accepted being used, or I could be the person who stood up for myself. I chose myself, and I'd make that choice every single time.